But this individual had become such a central part of his professional and emotional world that cutting ties left a wound that never fully healed. When Selleck later reflected on those years, he admitted that it was this man, and only this man, who had been able to do that to me, to shake him so deeply that he carried the impact long after their paths diverged. For fans accustomed to seeing Selleck as the embodiment of strength, this admission revealed an entirely new side of him. It showed that his life was not simply a story of fame and success, but also of trust, vulnerability, and the kind of heartbreak that lingers even in old age. It also helped explain some of Selleck's later choices. After Magnum P.I. ended, he deliberately stepped back from Hollywood, retreating to his ranch and focusing on family. Many saw this as a conscious rejection of stardom, a way of reclaiming control over his life. But those who know him best suggest it was also a way to protect himself, to avoid ever again giving someone the ability to break down the barriers he worked so hard to build. Now, decades later, as he looks back from the vantage point of 80 years, Selleck seems willing to let the world in on a truth he once kept locked away. This confession is less about scandal and more about honesty, about acknowledging the rare connection that left him changed forever, even if it came with pain. For most of his career, Tom Selleck was the picture of composure. Whether standing in front of the camera or giving interviews, he rarely let his guard down. Hollywood was full of actors who thrived on gossip and drama, but Selleck preferred a quieter, more controlled existence. He chose his words carefully, avoided public scandals, and made sure the image he projected matched the values he wanted to stand for. But with this one relationship, the one that he admitted could truly rattle him, cracks appeared in that carefully built armor. Those closest to Selleck describe moments when he seemed visibly shaken, unlike the steady presence fans adored on screen. Arguments could leave him distracted for days, retreating into silence as he tried to process emotions he often struggled to express. For a man who prided himself on being the rock for everyone around him, that vulnerability was difficult to accept. Yet, he also knew that these emotions came from a place of genuine connection, something rare in an industry built on appearances and ambition. The two men shared an unusual kind of bond. It wasn't just professional. It was personal in a way that blurred boundaries. When times were good, they leaned on each other, offering support in ways few others could. During tough filming schedules or moments of personal stress, their conversations went beyond scripts and set design. They spoke about life, family, fears, and regrets, topics Selleck usually kept tightly locked away. And perhaps that's why the fallout between them left such a lasting scar. When their friendship began to unravel, the pain cut deep. Hollywood insiders whispered about creative clashes, power struggles, and the kind of rivalries that often destroy relationships in the entertainment industry. But those close to Selleck insist it was something more personal, something rooted in trust. This wasn't just a colleague or a friend walking away. It was someone who had held a rare place in Selleck's heart. For years afterward, Selleck avoided speaking publicly about what had happened. He buried himself in work, pouring his focus into Blue Bloods and other projects that allowed him to stay busy while maintaining the privacy he craved. But those who watched him closely noticed subtle changes. His performances carried more weight, more depth, as though he had tapped into reservoirs of pain and vulnerability that he once resisted showing. Fans praised him for his ability to bring quiet intensity to his roles. But few realized those performances may have been shaped by very real heartbreak. When Selleck finally broke his silence decades later, admitting that he was the only one who could do that to me, it was both a confession and a release. At 80, he no longer felt the need to uphold the perfect image. Instead, he seemed ready to acknowledge that even the strongest men carry private wounds, and that sometimes the most powerful relationships are also the most destructive. This revelation also underscored a larger truth about Hollywood. Beneath the glamour and success, the industry is filled with fragile connections, where egos clash and trust is rare. For someone like Tom Selleck, who built his reputation on loyalty and authenticity, being betrayed, or perhaps simply misunderstood, was devastating. It forced him to reevaluate not just his career, but his entire approach to relationships. And yet, despite the pain, Selleck's confession wasn't laced with bitterness. There was sadness, yes, but also gratitude. In his own way, he acknowledged that the relationship, as complicated as it was, had shaped him into the man he became. It taught him the limits of control, the value of honesty, and the reality that even Hollywood icons aren't immune to heartbreak. As Tom Selleck reaches 80, his confession feels less like a scandal and more like a meditation on the cost of being human in a world that so often demands perfection. To the outside world, Selleck is still the towering figure with the iconic mustache, the patriarch on Blue Bloods and the man who helped define American television in the 1980s. But to those who listened closely to his words, it became clear that beneath the fame and accolades was a man reflecting on the most fragile parts of his journey, when he admitted, "He was the only one who could do that to me." Selleck wasn't pointing fingers or attempting to reopen old wounds. Instead, he was acknowledging a truth that had lived quietly inside him for decades. The truth that even the strongest people have weak spots. That even the most disciplined lives can be unsettled by relationships that run deeper than expected. His words carried both melancholy and relief, as though he had finally made peace with something that once haunted him. For Selleck, the relationship that left such an imprint wasn't just about conflict or betrayal. It was about connection. It reminded him of what it meant to be vulnerable, to let someone in far enough that they could touch the parts of him he usually kept hidden. And while the fallout brought pain, it also brought lessons. Lessons about loyalty, trust, and the unpredictable nature of human bonds. In many ways, Selleck's later life choices seemed to stem from this experience. His retreat to his California ranch, his deliberate decision to live away from Hollywood's flashing lights, and his determination to prioritize family over fame. All of these reflect a man who had been burned by the intensity of connection and chose to protect himself the only way he knew how. And yet, fans never saw a broken man. They saw someone who carried himself with dignity, who never allowed bitterness to cloud his reputation. Unlike many stars of his era, Selleck avoided tabloid scandals, public feuds, or the kind of messy headlines that often overshadow talent. Instead, he continued to deliver thoughtful, grounded performances, each one infused with the quiet strength and emotional depth that had come to define him. In interviews, when pressed about regrets or missed opportunities, Selleck often spoke in measured tones. He admitted to turning down roles that could have made him even more famous, but never seemed to regret choosing privacy and family over constant spotlight. And though he rarely spoke of that pivotal relationship, his confession at 80 revealed just how deeply it had shaped him. It was a reminder that even the most guarded lives have chapters marked by heartbreak, and that sometimes those chapters teach us more than any triumph ever could. For fans who have followed his career for decades, the confession humanized him in a way nothing else could. The man who had always seemed untouchable, the hero who never cracked under pressure, was suddenly just like everyone else. Someone who had loved, lost, and carried the weight of memory. It made his story not just one of Hollywood stardom, but of resilience, humility, and honesty. And as Selleck continues his life away from the frenzy of the entertainment industry, his legacy stands not only on the characters he brought to life, but also on the courage he showed in finally telling his truth. At 80, his confession wasn't about reliving the past. It was about setting himself free, acknowledging that even icons are shaped by the people who move their hearts, for better or worse.